Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on crisis measurement strategies to mitigate and avoid crises. I'm Angus, and we're excited to dive right into today's session focused on trust metrics, trusted voices, and AI-powered issue management for crisis response. Our speakers are Angela Dwyer, Head of Insights at Fullintel, and James Rubeck, our Head of Product. They'll guide you through insights from recent studies and share actionable strategies to strengthen your crisis management toolkit. The presentation will take approximately 30 minutes, and then we will open the floor to questions. Please feel free to type questions into the chat or the Q&A throughout the webinar, and we will be sure to answer them at the end. And with that, I'll hand it over to Angela and James. Thanks again for being here.
All right, great to be with you today. As mentioned, I'm Angela Dwyer, Head of Insights at Fullintel. We specialize in media monitoring analysis using human curation, the best of AI. So we're delighted to be with you today. My background is in media measurement. I have spent more than 15 years helping brands prove value and improve performance through strategic measurement. I've mostly focused on developing metrics backed by scientific research. I've presented and published this research, and today we'll actually be sharing results from a hot off the press study that we conducted. I'm involved with various organizations just to make sure I'm always learning and contributing best practices in measurement. I currently serve as the director of the Institute for Public Relations Measurement Commission, as co-chair for the PRSA North Pacific District, and I'm on the board of the International Public Relations Research Conference. Also, very proud member of AMEC. Fullintel is a member of AMEC, and so I know some of you are joining us from AMEC celebrating Measurement Month with us today. So delighted to be with you. I'm looking forward to sharing this study and diving into crisis today.
And I'm James Rubeck. I'm the head of product at Fullintel. I've been in public relations and public relations technology for the past 10 years. I was the senior director of product management at Cision. But before that, I was a PR guy. I worked for Randstad Canada as their English Canadian PR manager, and I won some PRSA and IABC Ovation Awards for gender equity research and employment trends. Really, what I do is I take the measurement best practices that Angela is developing with AMEC and IPR and IPRC and Page, and I try to intone those into software. I love crisis management. I'm obsessed with the media. I'm obsessed with how the media and content, and particularly words, shape society. So I've had my research and my findings featured particularly around election analyses. I try to predict elections. I got the last one wrong. But my research has been found in CBC's The National, Yahoo Finance, Variety Magazine, Toronto Star, television and print quite a bit. Today, we're going to talk about the changing nature of crisis and really starting to get an understanding of something you might be feeling. You might feel like crises and issues are getting worse. There might be more of them. And for a lot of us, hey, that sounds great. Our jobs are secure for a long time. There's issues to tackle. But for brands, it's understanding the true risk that those issues can present. So as challenges have changed and as the media has changed, maybe the way we manage and engage and think about crises needs is too as well. So I want to frame this issue. So we've been trying to nail this down for the last year or so. Angela and I are meeting, monthly, talking about, do we really understand how things have changed? And while researching that, we stumbled on a really great article in the Harvard Business Review. It was published by the CEO of Stagwell, a guy named Mark Penn. And he framed it like this. We built a chart about it, though, so I'll take credit for that. It's really looking at the shape of a crisis. The crisis that we're really used to, what most of our industry are used to, is a U-curve. It takes about 6 months to a year after a crisis has started for it to settle into a position where that crisis has been mostly managed. And then a brand can actually have a recovery. Its stock price and its reputational metrics will return back to its pre-crisis state, or hell, will have improved. Now, sometimes this U-curve is much smaller. But in general, we're seeing that path. It's 2 to 3 years post-crisis for a full recovery. The problem is that isn't necessarily happening anymore. Some brands are finding that their issues are lasting years and years, and they might never actually get fully dealt with. They might never fully recover. When that happens, a brand starts to have some baggage. And when we look at that, we look at the transition from that U-curve, that short U-curve, to a long L-curve. The brands no longer recover. The crisis state, the brand is in the crisis state for 2 to 4 times as long. So from 6 months all the way up to 2 years now is perfectly reasonable and expected for a crisis. And the recovery state can also double. It goes from 1 to 2 years, and the brand stock value is back, the reputational value is back. That's just not the case. It doesn't happen as much anymore. Brands like Disney, brands like Target, brands like Bud Light, Anheuser-Busch, they are starting to see these issues lost in the 5 to 7 year time horizon until stock price and reputational value is increased back to that level state. We're going to go into talking a little bit about why that's happening. Sorry about that. And particularly how people are shifting around understanding their brand and understanding the challenges that we had versus the good old days when we just had that U-curve to worry about. One of the reasons we're starting to see this is that consumers are already really mad. Our consumers have been activated. They're politically minded, and there's more and more of them who are engaged in culture war issues. When we're talking about culture war issues, I've got this left and right wing spectrum. There's more than that. There's more in that spectrum across the board. But when brands start to fall on to these landmines, these challenges they're facing communication-wise, they blow up in their face. And brands need to be aware this damage is occurring, whether you're trying to make it happen or not. Just the words you're using, the people that you're putting forward as voices, those can be polarizing now in ways that they weren't in the past. What we see are globally activated consumers. And there's 3 areas where we're going to explore globally activated consumers. The first is an anti-capitalist backlash. People, while they trust businesses more than they trust government and more than they trust the media, they don't love the wealthy. And they certainly don't love powerful CEOs acting in political ways. So we're seeing a change in how people are activating against corporations and activating specifically against CEOs. There's a backlash against them. The second area we're going to dive into is the idea that long-tail social activism actually has an effect. People are really excited about the idea that if they push hard enough on something long enough, people will change their minds about those opinions. That's where we're seeing this quote-unquote culture war occur. The fact is that long-tail activism has had an effect. And where it has the most effect fastest is amongst businesses. So businesses and enterprises are the low-hanging fruit. I can make a business change in a 2 to 3 year time horizon, or even shorter than that, if I get enough people activated around it. So whether companies are talking about going woke or the left-wing mind virus, these impacts are actually felt. And we really think about it is that businesses need to be reactive and engaged just as quickly as people are. So this is just a brief list of films that include CEOs as the main character. There are more films being made today about CEOs and corporations than there are about Santa Claus. And the way the media and the way people consume that information, hey, CEOs are just as mythical and just as powerful. Now, if they're just as powerful as Santa Claus, they're being put on the television, they're being put on the big screen all the time. If they're that powerful, why can't they make changes faster? If they're that powerful, why aren't the organizations, why aren't they fair? Why isn't industry fair? These are the questions people have. Moving out of the concept of CEO backlash, when we're talking about why activism is so put forward by the public and why there's so much energy around these ideas, it's that it works. Gay marriage in the United States got passed in 2003. Millions of people have been positively affected by that. The Affordable Care Act in the United States, it passed in 2010. And ever since that point, people have been fighting to tear it down. Meanwhile, 45 million people are enrolled in health insurance. And the concept of Black Lives Matter. Yes, there are major issues in these areas amongst the American populace and around the world. But there are now chokehold bans in place in many jurisdictions across the United States. And if you look at the data, there's been fewer police homicides. So long-tail activism is painful. People have to stick with it for 20 years in some cases to see an effect. But if they do it, they get to their policy goal. Now, it's not just laws that consumers are trying to change. People activate by collecting themselves online. They form their own interest groups. They might not have $1 million in a think tank behind them, but they sure can activate and they can sure organize. So what we're seeing here is search data. This is Google searches on the concepts of boycotts and crowdfunding. Boycotts are blue, crowdfunding is red. You're seeing backlash against brands like Bud Light and Target and Starbucks and McDonald's all the time. These threats are present. And this is how consumers are organizing. They're using crowdfunding to support causes and people they think deserve it. And they're using boycotts to attack corporations they think don't. When we take a look at the types of news that gets generated out of crowdfunding, it's very politically minded. And this is a way to describe people are collecting and they're driving collective action. They're using the internet to do it. And the media is responding to that. The media is going to publish about big boycotts. They're going to publish about big crowdfunding activities. These are things you have to think about in the context of your brands. How many GoFundMe accounts are there that are trying to build a protest movement against your company? That should be something we measure as an industry. The reason why is that crisis has changed. We've talked a little bit about it. What I have up on the screen are the common vectors for crisis. Things like what your brand says, what your brand does, the companies they work with, how they activate in their communities, the actions of an individual CEO or the actions of an individual franchisee. Those are all things that we know can cause a problem. But now there's just all these other different types of perspectives. Maybe someone's going to be highly critical of Ukraine, or maybe they're going to still operate a business in Russia. Nestle's been attacked for that. Mostly rightly, I'd say. But there's other movements where people are really against DEI. It's a measurement tactic to understand how many people of various equity concerns are in your business and how do you support them. These are generally good things for society. People have really big criticisms of them. However, there's another whole area of criticism that we've been tracking and been able to identify. And we found news examples, hundreds of news examples of all of these. It's not just what your company does, it's who your leaders are. This is the low-hanging fruit now. Who are they specifically? What nationality are them? That seems to be fair game sometimes for the media. What do they invest in? Are they invested in their competitors? Are they invested in odd industries? Are they donating money to specific campaigns? So is your organization or is your CEO donating to one campaign or another on the political spectrum? But even things like how your leadership travels. People are tracking Taylor Swift's plane right now to tell you how much fossil fuel she's using. They're doing the same against your CEO. Whether that's fair or not, these are the types of natures of conversations we need to be advancing for and be aware of. It's not just what you say and what your company does, it's who your people are, what they use their money for, and even how they travel. This communal action we're seeing, the forming of interest groups, is why we're seeing these longer issues. The tail of an L curve is longer because it takes longer than just one election cycle to make a difference. The way people are activating and organizing is digital. Here's an example from Reddit. You have things like Wall Street Bets, GameStop, or funding toward AMC. People are collaborating using money as a way to drive activism. Hashtag anti-work is the concept, hey, the work lives aren't very fair anymore. And even attacks against individual corporations like Loblaws, a Canadian grocery retailer, they're massive. People are organizing to attack these companies. And at the same time, you see Reddit's revenue increasing because it's finding paths to support these folks. What we're going to dive into next is a review of what happens to a brand when it has baggage. What happens to a brand when it doesn't resolve the U curves and the L curves? And what impact does that have on purchase intent? And I'll pass the mic over to my dear friend, Angela.
All right. Thank you, James. With this background of the new type of crisis, we decided to look at 3 moments of crisis in the consumer airline industry to better understand the elements of impact in a crisis with key takeaways that will be relevant, independent of crisis type or industry. So here are the 3 crises we studied. First, we looked at Delta Airlines. There was backlash around their loyalty program changes. I know I will never get upgraded again. I think I was 69th on my last upgrade list because of these changes to the program. So first world problems, right? Second, we looked at the Southwest scheduling crisis. It shut down the system and it left many travelers stranded. You might remember this. It was right around the holidays back in 2022. And third, we analyzed the United Airlines crisis with an overbooked flight and a violent passenger removal. We actually went further back in time for this one, but it is an extremely important one because it humanized the impact of overbooked flights in a forceful and discriminatory way, and most closely touched a social issue as they dragged off an Asian gentleman from the airplane. So, our methodology here, we partnered with Dr. Tyler Page, a professor at the University of Connecticut, to look at the impact of each of these crises on the brand in a mixed methods analysis. And in this, we looked at 3 data sets. So, the first is survey. We looked at survey data for reputation as well as for purchase intent. So, these behavioral intentions. We looked at more than 6 reputation factors across the 3 brands during each crisis with over 20,000 survey responses per day. Second, we analyzed news coverage to understand sentiment, impact, and trust influences of news before, during, and after each crisis. Third, we layered on financial data. In this case, we mostly considered changes in stock prices compared to the industry. I'm going to share with you 6 key findings from this study that I think will be applicable for you, independent of your industry. So let's jump into our 6 findings from this study. First, media data can provide a pulse on crisis. Predictive metrics of media impact and trust from media content analysis, they show how crises are likely to impact brands before you can see the impact in reputational or financial changes. This can often be what I would call the canary in the coal mine, or the warning of danger and predicting outcomes. Media data show that Delta, in this case, experienced little to no backlash, but United Airlines and Southwest Airlines experienced a more negative impact of media and lower trust scores. A change in a loyalty program is a drop in a bucket compared to a system outage that affects thousands of people in the case of Southwest, or a moment that may only have directly influenced one, but indirectly spark a fire around a social issue of discrimination, as experienced by United. Well, crisis impact follows the customer funnel. The reputational and financial data confirm what the media data predicted. Financial numbers were continuing to fall until the last day we analyzed, which was 30 days post-crisis. As such, you could likely assume that they continue to fall. So we're going to see some of the financial impact, but we're not quite looking at the long-term financial impact yet. But as you can see here, reputation and purchase intent numbers dropped for Southwest and United from the pre-crisis to the post-crisis period. This comes from our survey data. Southwest may have started with a higher consumer reputation and therefore experienced even more consumer upset, whereas United, a little bit more of a business-focused airline, saw reputational impacts to a slightly lesser degree and even less purchase intent impacts. However, looking at stock data compared to the industry, United saw the biggest dip. These findings support what I call a crisis impact funnel. The media influences reputation, which influences purchase intent, which influences the bottom line. In sum, the media matters. And when I say media, this could include social conversations and even AI engine outputs. In fact, when explaining risk to leaders and getting buy-in for proactive crisis planning, which I know you need to get, I'd flip this funnel. So look at it now, it's a risk pyramid. I would start by talking about the potential financial impacts. That's what they really care about, and that's how you're going to communicate the risk to your leaders and get buy-in. So I would start with that, and then I would work down the funnel. And I would explain that if we have decreased purchase intent, that will influence reputation, which comes from or is influenced by media. So if we don't take these actions to improve media impact, we're going to see all of that ripple effect as we see in this pyramid. Third, in previous studies, we've proven that 3 factors influence trust. Ability, which is how well you do what you do. Okay, this is competence, efficacy, quality of leadership, quality of product. Purpose, this is the good that you do for your audiences. This might include donations or sustainability initiatives, philanthropic work. And third, integrity, which is transparency, justice, any kind of legal issue is going to fall into this integrity bucket. Well, what we learned from this crisis study is that ability is the strongest predictor of news sentiment, but especially in a crisis situation. Okay, so really quick, for those of you who aren't stats enthusiasts, let me give some context here from this chart that I'm showing you. So a p-value that is less than 0.001 shows a statistical significance. Okay, in academic research, anything under about a 0.05 is considered statistically significant. Okay, so I'm very confident in these results. Next, a beta value, the other number that you're seeing, it shows the strength of the correlation. Anything over a 0 shows a correlation. Or under is, it could also be under a 0 is a negative correlation, but a positive correlation over a 0, a weak correlation if it's under about a 0.3, and a 0.7 is a strong correlation. So in this case, ability has a notable strong impact on sentiment. The takeaway is always focus on ability in news coverage, especially during a crisis. It's not the time to talk about the good you are doing in an attempt to mask a problem. The Band-Aid approach does not work here. You need to address head-on problem solution, focusing on your ability. Number 4, human visuals make all the difference. Well, in another study that I conducted, I found that visuals have the greatest impact on recall over headlines, over prominence. But not all visuals are created equally. I also found that branded visuals with a human element lead to the most engagement. So when times are good, this is all great. Use human elements as much as possible in branded images. A human element could literally just be a hand, someone holding a product. It humanizes it. If you're in the medical field, maybe it's a patient, right? So you're really humanizing it. However, in a crisis, avoid human visuals at all costs. They activate a personal connection and they increase outrage. I mean, look at this poor lady who likely missed her granddaughter's birthday because of a Southwest flight delay, right? We feel for her. We're connected now. Non-branded human visuals and branded human visuals are the two types of visuals that lead to the most negative sentiment in a crisis. In this chart, we are looking at sentiment impacts on a 5-point scale. So the lower, the more negative, the higher, the more positive. The type of image that performs best in a crisis is actually a branded visual without a human element. I thought this was interesting because it's not a non-branded visual that performs best. It's actually a branded visual without a human element. It shows that brand is taking ownership, taking responsibility. So the key takeaway here, again, is stick to a sterile brand image in a crisis. Number 5, voices. Anyone quoted directly or indirectly in news coverage influence sentiment. While they have a 21% direct impact on sentiment, voices have what we call a mediated effect. This is a really interesting model. They have a mediated effect through trust. What does that mean? It means that they're sharing messages that build trust, and that trust influences sentiment by 40%. Or 40% influences trust, 55% that influences sentiment. So what does this mean? This means getting any voices in coverage during a crisis can improve sentiment, obviously as long as they're positive, because voices are more likely to share content that builds trust. So even that spokesperson is going to share content that is more likely to build trust, which will drive more positive sentiment overall. Well, the impact of voices can be seen more clearly when we break these voices into 2 categories, what I call trusted and untrusted voices. In a study that I previously conducted on trusted voices, I found that they have greater influence in a crisis than untrusted voices. This makes sense, right? We approach a quote from a corporate spokesperson, an executive, a government official with caution, right? With reserve, but inherently trust a consumer like me, or even an employee or an objective expert, right? Someone who we feel like we can trust who doesn't have a motive. Well, in a crisis, what we found is both trusted and non-trusted voices have moderate to large effects on the overall sentiment of news articles. The elements of trust in news stories, again, partially mediate the relationship between voices in a news story and sentiment of those stories. So the difference here is that a trusted voice, a voice that is inherently trusted, directly increases sentiment. What that means is if it's trusted voice, it actually doesn't matter so much what they say. It just matters that they're in there because people trust them, and that will increase sentiment directly. However, if you're an untrusted voice, right? This could be, for example, a spokesperson or an executive. These people can largely be trained by PR people on what to say and what the messaging is. They should focus on sharing facts and information specifically around ability that showcases the organization's ability that can then increase trust, which will improve sentiment. So when it comes to trusted voices, who they are, again, is more important than what they actually say. I think this can be really useful for you in a time of crisis. Okay, so let's just wrap up this study with a review of key application to avoid and mitigate crises. So first, I want to recommend that you use a mix of data to predict impact. Well, this study has shown us that, first of all, not all crises or brands are equal. We know that. But this means when estimating the impact of a crisis, you need to consider the following three factors. First, the current brand positioning in media, reputation, purchase intent, and stock prices. And remember to look at even what AI search engines are putting out in response to questions about your brand or a particular crisis, because this is influencing your audiences. Second, the type of crisis. Think about how many people are affected. Is it more product specific or issue specific? As we learned from the new curve of crises, this L curve, if it's issue specific, it's likely going to have a bigger impact than something product specific and have a longer tail of influence. Third, look at your relationship with trusted voices. Treating interest groups with respect to all times develops what we call advocates who will stand up for you in moments of crisis. When a crisis hits, it's too late to start building relationships. You need to build those right away so that they can stand up for you because their voices, again, are trusted. And they will be able to share the messages that you want to share, but have greater impact. While immediate effects of a crisis are clear, such as negative media and even some reputational impacts, impact on things like purchase intent and even stock valuation, they often appear later. So it's important to continue to track data points over time. In fact, consistent collection and analysis of crisis data over time will provide the benchmark necessary to calculate the cost of a crisis. I actually recommend using 3 data sources in what I'm going to call the crisis benchmark recipe, CBR. Okay, we're going to look at media analysis for media impact, survey for reputation and purchase intent, and stock data or sales data, right, depending on your organization, for the financial ingredient. The key to this recipe is to collect these pieces of data for as many crises as possible, both yours and your competitors, over time. With this database, you can actually organize by type and adjust the impact based on the brand position compared to competitors in the industry. Well, when it comes to proactively or reactively responding to media during a crisis, this study provides clear indications of both tailwinds and headwinds. So I recommend that you lean into the tailwinds that will propel you forward and try to avoid the headwinds that will slow you down and amplify the impact of the crisis. As a reminder, focus on ability, integrate trusted voices, and stick to branded images without any human elements in a crisis for success. Well, last on this, how do I avoid a crisis? It's the million-dollar question, right? If we had just started here, we could have avoided 98% of our webinar today. Well, my first tip is to identify topics that could lead to a crisis in your industry. Follow these over time and prepare for any bubbling in these areas. AI innovations can optimize this process. In fact, we're going to show you some of those in the next section. Avoid that tragic flip-flop. We've seen brands alienating up to 50% of their audience by engaging in a polarizing issue, only to do a 180 at the first sign of criticism, resulting in the alienation of the other 50%. You're not going to have everyone on your team. They're not all going to love you, but you have to really think about consistency, which feeds into that integrity piece of trust. Third, prioritize a proactive approach. Use this presentation to start a conversation with your leaders and get buy-in on tracking the issues before they become full-blown crises. You can save a lot in the long term if you take a proactive approach. And finally, take this long-term perspective that motivates ethical behavior. Integrity is an essential element of trust. A breach of integrity is often the tipping point for a crisis. So I hope that these points can help you that we found from this study. I'm going to pass it back over to James to wrap it up.
There's some really great questions coming in. We're going to take those right at the end. But first, I just want to talk a little bit on how AI tools and Fullintel's systems could actually support you. So for many of our customers, we supply them with human curated briefs and human curated analyses. And briefings are really valuable. There's absolutely a use case in surfacing your news to your executive team and to inform your organization, right? So you need brand monitoring. You need to know when you're in the news. So at least when someone mentions it to your CEO, he's aware or they're aware. You need to display success. You need to showcase we're doing great work. We're being proactive. We're getting these messages out into the public, whether you're in a government organization or working for a private enterprise, showing their work is important and being rewarded for it and people being aware that it's there, that it happened is good. Competitor tracking. You need to know what's going on. You need to know up to the minute, hey, your competitor's doing something new, interesting. You need briefings for this. They need to be accurate. They need to be executive ready, and they're sent for awareness and intelligence. But there's something crucial in the middle of that. It's time. Curating data, producing executive news briefs, that takes time, whether it's your time or Fullintel's. Someone needs to do the labor. But when you're in a crisis and there's something so new, you need to be able to do it quickly. Time is of the essence. This is where AI becomes so powerful. So whether it's boycott threats, spillover risk, your one competitor is doing something weird, hey, they're having a labor relations problem. The media starts asking your company, what are you doing on labor relations? Do you have the same problems? That's a spillover. You need to be alerted to it and you need to be informed. And AI has the ability to read that news and summarize it and provide perspectives, whether it's from an interest group's perspective, your competitor's perspective, or your consumer's perspective. You can understand more when you engage with an AI and dig into those elements a little bit deeper. And also things like old issues resurfacing, all the skeletons that are in your closet, the things you don't necessarily want to see in a daily executive news brief. You need an AI alert for that. You need to be aware of what's happened yesterday. You need to be aware it's happened over the last 6 hours. So one way we've done that is enshrining some of those best practices in content tagging and content search inside our Fullintel Hub AI Edition platform. And we do things like AI overviews. You can get an AI overview against any of the coverage you see in our system by clicking one button, and it'll summarize that news for you. Our AI alerts deliver that into your inbox. So we use a couple other tools associated to our product. One is our predictive AI tool set, which helps identify whether news is going to be more impactful, whether it's going to have more syndicated and related articles to it. Just by using our predictive AI tool set, we identify whether it's going to be more popular over the next 24 to 48 hours. When you marry that up with our AI overviews, you can start to get a sense of the most critical news that your team needs to be aware of, but also get it read to you. So you don't need to directly read the 50 articles from that issue. You're going to get it spoon-fed to you in a way that you can consume it faster. Knowledge is power. We have fear of the unknown. AI and the systems that are available through our service can help alleviate those concerns, give you more knowledge, be less fearful. And when we're talking with the future of crisis, there's a couple last things that we want to leave with you, and I'll let Angela tackle those.
Perfect. So just to wrap up, oftentimes I'm asked to predict the future, whether that's the future of measurement, the future of crises, are these going to increase or decrease? So I want to just give you a few thoughts of this, and then we'll go right into your questions. There's some great questions there. So first, the L curve, it's not going away. In fact, I think the long tail may only get longer. Second, AI may facilitate or amplify crises as misinformation and disinformation can spread quickly and appear to come from credible sources, may they be or not be. And PR professionals really need to consider what I call the new influencer. This is AI engines. The media landscape continues to evolve, but content is still content and it still matters, although it may be delivered and consumed in different formats. People will increasingly go to AI engines for answers. Well, the good news for PR professionals about this is that earned media coverage from credible outlets is actually one of the key content sources in AI engines, or that is prioritized in AI engines like ChatGPT. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Political and social involvement is likely to continue from audiences who are motivated by success Remember the active consumers? They will continue to pressure companies to jump in too. Do you see any of this going on right now? Companies are more likely to alienate audiences with more general polarization. So, again, gone are the days of people pleasing. When you can't make everyone happy, focus on your core audience and company values. It will be increasingly important to make sure that you, your organization, and others in the industry are taking steps to shed light on misinformation and bias in models, pushing for transparency and trusted AI. So I invite you to be a cognizant consumer of AI outputs and don't be a spreader of misinformation. And last but definitely not least, measurement will matter more and more. I have seen a positive trend lately of companies hiring in-house measurement experts or partnering with measurement experts to make sure they are being strategic in approaches. Vanity metrics or automated numbers that don't communicate anything are a dime a dozen, but they have no real value. But science-based measurement using data like data shared today, it can help brands avoid crises and communicate the value of that crisis avoidance. So thank you so much for joining us. We're going to pop into questions now.
Perfect. Thank you so much, James and Angela. I really love that presentation. The first question from Julia is, how is reputation calculated? And I think that's a great one for you, Angela.
Yes, thanks, Julia. That's a great question. I didn't go into much detail about that. So in this case, when we're talking about reputation and the way we calculate it in the metrics, is we're using survey data and we're specifically looking, while we looked at 6 different reputational factors, the 2 main ones we're considering is a recommend, which would be kind of like a net promoter score. And the second one is one that's positioned as proud to work or recommend or proud to work there or for a friend were to work there or embarrassed to work there. So it's kind of another reputation metric around how proud you would be to be associated with that brand. So it's kind of the recommend and the association. And those are the 2 main ones I used for reputation in this case, and it's coming from that survey data.
Thank you so much. And moving on to the next one, James, this one sounds like a good one for you. How long do I need to track my brand and its crises to build a model that predicts impact?
Yeah, I mean, I'd start with kind of persistent tracking, not just of your crises, but also the crises of your competitors. So the time bound is 1 to 2 years. I would say is a really good starting point because it gives you the chance to actually capture issues from across your competitive base. And if you're only looking at a period of a couple months, you're not going to have the pre-crisis state, and you're not going to have the post-crisis state, and you're not going to capture all that much on the recovery. So not all crises take 3 years to resolve. Some of them are smaller issues that bubble up and you're able to squash them. Hey, you had a product problem. A lot of people complain about it. But 1 to 2 years of data is kind of the starting point because it gives you that polarity. It also gets you past cyclical cycles, right? You've got Christmas coming up. It happens twice. You capture for 2 years, you can see a pattern. So it's really about data fidelity and data volume over time. If you're just trying to track a single crisis and understand its impact in isolation, that can tell you a lot and can definitely give you some trust data. But I would suggest 1 to 2 years is a good basis to start with. Angela, what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that seasonality piece is really important because there are cyclical moments that brands see. So again, you want at least a year. 2 years will give you twice through those seasonal moments. And obviously, the more the better. The more you have, the more accurate your predictions are going to become, which makes sense. But again, if you can even get a year under your belt, that's a great start. And keep in mind, while that feels overwhelming, go high level on this, right? You don't need to look at everything everywhere. Even if you can just start getting a high level kind of grid of what's happening, it's a great place to start. I highly recommend it as we're wrapping up 2024. If you haven't done this exercise, put some time on your calendar at the end of the year and look into this. You can do this. You can have your intern do this, but it's just a great place for you to start.
Amazing. And next, we have a great question from Gassan about authenticity and visuals. So, in a time of crisis, wouldn't a more honest and visual approach work the best as information is everywhere and people see right through the brand's idealistic image?
I mean, that's a great point. The data showed us in this case that it's going to be more positive, but to your point, it could be more effective. I think the problem is you can amplify the impact that it doesn't really have to have in a negative sense. So what I mean is there's an oil spill. Well, an oil spill is not good. But then if you're showing, children playing in the water and birds dying, like, no, that's not great. But I do think that if you were to show your brand, you're accepting responsibility. So there could be a place for both of them. I'm not saying it's not a good thing, but I would say the human aspect does tend to amplify, maybe even greater than the actual effects. What I mean by that is we've all seen crises that, yeah, it's a problem, but maybe one person was affected. And as soon as we amplify it with those human visuals, now we think that thousands and thousands have been affected, and we're not seeing it in the right perspective or context. So I think authenticity is absolutely key, but I don't know if that means, adding all those human visuals to your content. They might be out there, yes. And I think that sticking to more of your branded visual is more effective in sentiment. And if you want to show the problem, I actually don't think that's a bad idea either.
Yeah.
It's the human piece that I think is where you're going to maybe make it bigger than you want it to be or than it might actually be.
Yeah.
So, I mean, let's test it and see.
Yeah, I want to just throw an example out there. So you mentioned the oil spill. BP Oil, they had an enormous undersea oil spill. It lasted months. It just, Billy, like, so much brand value for BP got lost. BP still exists. The UK is doing an enormous amount of investment with BP. But one of the reasons why I think they were able to recover from the largest oil spill in the history of the world in the ocean, mind you, is because they had video cameras on the tools they were using to cap the well. They built this concrete bunker around the well and found a way to plug it up. And they had a live camera of this submarine and this big pipe and this all this machinery to help resolve the issue. That made the issue the rescue effort, the recovery effort. It showcases BP's ability in engineering skill. They showcased the collaboration they had with many governments to make that resolution occur. So I think if you're going to, try to solve a problem, showing your work isn't a bad thing, particularly as awareness of the issue is already so persistent. If the issue is big enough where the whole world's watching, you might as well give them something to watch and control it a little bit. I think it's a really key insight. But the research was really direct. You show people and you're in a time of crisis, it's negative for you more and more often than it's positive.
It's great.
Great, thank you. And we have a great follow-up question about a very timely issue, the US election. So James, why don't you take this one on?
I was going to give that to
You wanna-
James too. He's Canadian, and I think he's the most appropriate person to speak on this.
a
But
nice
yeah,
nasal
a lot of
perspective.
research in the political space.
Yes, happy to tackle it. So what let me
Right.
just pull up. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the US 2024 elections, Kamala had the backing of major celebrity figures who have a strong voice, and the public holds them to a high standard, such as the likes of Taylor Swift. But she didn't secure the win. What was missing? If she had the endorsements of top voices from every industry in the States?
So you have more than one voice. And while Taylor Swift is one of the largest voices in the world, just being a large voice doesn't necessarily make you trusted. And at the same time, Taylor Swift is a billionaire, and people don't really love rich people. My son, he's 5 years old, loves Taylor Swift more than anyone in the world. Taught himself to read because of Taylor Swift's songs. I'm not kidding. But is she a trusted voice? She's a trusted voice among some people, probably some people that the Democrats already had voting for them. Now, there is other voices. Elon Musk is a very big voice. He runs one of the largest social networks on the planet, controls it with an iron fist. Joe Rogan, millions of people listen to his podcast. So while there are lots of influencers who the traditional media would consider as the most powerful voices in the world, there are other voices and other media channels. It's not just what's going on in the Washington Post and Newsweek and the Wall Street Journal anymore. It's everything that's going on in Joe Rogan's podcast and Elon Musk's Twitter feed. So there were negative endorsements toward Harris, just as there were positive endorsements. And it seems as though the voices that were easiest to persuade or most interesting to persuade among the electorate were more swayed by right-wing influencers that are not traditional influencers from the same sense that we would have expected from celebrity figures of past years. It's one of the many reasons why the Harris campaign failed to get out the vote, so to speak.
So we have a follow-up question on that, James. So I'm confused by your view on trust and wealth. Elon Musk is the wealthiest man in the world. Why would there be a distrust in Taylor Swift as a wealthy person, but not in Elon?
It's more so about the audience as opposed to just the wealth in particular. So if you look at the overall audience value, I would put Elon Musk and Taylor Swift at a near one-to-one. Um, Certainly, her fan base is a powerful mouthpiece for her, but at the same time, Elon Musk has a fairly vocal and fairly active fan base. Some of that fan base are bots, but it's more about the audience. The goal was not just to reach the most people with a message; it was to reach the most people with the most effect. I think it would be a very interesting trust analysis to do, comparing the brand communications of a collection of celebrities from both the right wing and left wing polarization as part of a post-election analysis. We haven't done that analysis. My theory is, and worth testing, is that the audiences were more persuaded by the right wing groups, and the trust communications around that would highlight some of that. But it would be an interesting evaluation. I'm not trying to create a dichotomy saying that only rich people can't be trusted. It's just that there is a different perspective across both audiences. Some right-wing audiences think Elon Musk is an absolute genius. Same with some left-wing audiences. Some right-wing audiences love Taylor Swift music. They love that they can send their kids to see a beautiful concert. That doesn't necessarily mean that they want to listen to the political opinions. And also, just to be clear, while Taylor Swift did endorse Harris, she didn't tell people to specifically vote for her. She just said, "I am voting for Kamala Harris. I hope you vote." So it wasn't quite as strong of a forceful endorsement as it would have been from Elon Musk standing on multiple stages saying, "This is the only person you should vote for. I am also voting for him." It's a different type level of endorsement. So it's not quite the perfect comparison. But obviously, Harris lost, unfortunately.
So let me add just two quick thoughts before we move on from this is one, I've done studies in the past about who are the most trusted voices. Celebrities are actually not trusted voices, right? They are not people like me, right? Or not even a third party credible expert. So that's one thing to note is that while celebrities are there, they're actually not what I'd put in a trusted voice bucket necessarily. However, remember the mediated effects model? It matters what they say. So just as James mentioned, the celebrity said, "I'm voting for this person," but they didn't give you those trust building messages, right? They didn't say, "Here are the attributes that should shape how you think about that will then influence maybe that reputation or that sentiment." So just a few more thoughts on that I think we can learn from this study and from previous studies, but I think it's a great question. But I'll let us move on from that. Thank you.
There's also
Perfect.
a quick question from Dan F about AI regurgitating old news content as new content. So just a question on squashing that. The way we do that is that we actually use the curated coverage that our team produces on a day-to-day basis to tell the AI what reality is today. So it's ingesting encoded off content that is human validated to begin with. And that way, our AI, the responses our AI gives are highly accurate. So our strategy for quashing the old news content is by telling the AI more carefully what to look at. And that's our main strategy. And having human supervision of that AI on a use case to use case basis is really what makes the difference in preventing challenges with the AI's response. So great question from Dan.
Great. And we just have a couple left. How can I get leadership buy-in to invest in proactive crisis planning?
I'll take that one. Great question. Buy-in is a challenge. Like I said, I'm in the measurement space. Sometimes it's hard to get buy-in, even though people know it is good for them, that it's part of the planning, it's part of every step of the journey. But one of the things that I have found effective is storytelling with numbers. And what I mean by that is telling your leaders what has happened to other brands in the industry. Sometimes they're not going to listen when they see their brand, but if you can even take a competitor, a comparator, some other brand and say, "Hey, look, this is what happened to them. And this was the impact or the cost to the brand." Looking at those three data sets we talked about, look at the media, look at some survey data around reputation, look at some of the financial impacts. If you can tell that story to your leaders, they're going to listen. So that's one recommendation I have is showing the data, showing this research, even if it is sharing this presentation and saying, "Hey, we need to start." And then when you start, maybe you start small. Maybe you're not getting buy-in for some huge investment or program, but maybe you're getting buy-in for something over nothing, right? Starting this process. So again, use stories and data from competitors who have faced issues and had been affected financially. Use these airlines examples, but it's better to have examples in your industry. So pick those and share those with your leaders, and I hope that that can get some buy-in for you.
Thank you so much, Angela. And on to the last question. What if I'm at a small organization that doesn't see big crises? Why would crisis planning matter for me?
I think it's
Maybe.
a really interesting question. So, um, there's a Winston Churchill quote which goes something to the effect of, "An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile hoping it does not eat him first." Um, just because an issue is not affecting you right now doesn't mean it won't. So while your organization may not face many issues today, what about your industry? And I'd broaden that question and say, not just my industry, but organizations of a similar type of mine in different jurisdictions. So the problems that other jurisdictions or other regions of the world or other regions of the country are facing could well affect you in the near future. If you're not aware of all of the potential risks, you're kind of walking blind through a room full of sharp knives, right? You gotta understand, where are those landmines? Where are those big challenges that could blow up in our face? So if it's not affecting your industry or your company right now today, it doesn't mean that other issues might not spill over, or the population's perspectives on something might shift. So if it's not just for your company, I wouldn't navel gaze. I wouldn't only look at issues from your company. I try to broaden that out, look at your whole industry and understand the landscape of challenges, like a placemat or a maze, where you should navigate yourselves to avoid them. Great question.
Yeah, I would also add on that one that while you might not feel there are big risks, well, either product risks, service risks, or social issue risks, you might think of missed opportunities as risks as well. So you could be limiting opportunities based off of different conversations or behaviors as well. So I think it's really important to actually approach and say, well, do I have risk? And start from that point, asking that question, and then looking in that expanded vision. And it might even be different industries that you're going to learn from that have a similar model. Are you in a regulated industry? Who is your audience? And asking these questions and understanding, well, what's important to my audience? Because even if it's not directly related to your business, if it's something they care about, they might find a way to link an issue to your business that you'll need to care about. So it's a great question. I'd really be interested to dive into that a little bit more and brainstorm. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for joining us.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again for attending this, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. And as mentioned in the chat, we will follow up with an email after we have time to download the video, the webinar, and edit it, and we'll send it to you as a follow-up email. Thanks again.
Great to see you all. Thanks for joining us. Connect on
Thanks.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, thanks so
Bye-bye.
much for your time.
Bye, all.